Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 25th of September 2025, and I promise I will not release as many videos today as I did yesterday. Goodness me, that was exhausting, but I promise that if stuff happens, I'll be on it. Anyway, we'll start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find them linked in the description below. Some pretty staggering numbers here in certainly one category. 940 personnel is fairly typical, quite high, but not over 1,000 as we used to have it. 2 troop-carrying airfields and no tanks, so typically low there. 38 artillery systems, fairly high, above the daily average. Not as high as yesterday, but decent number. 5 multiple launch rocket systems, extraordinary number in that category. 5 MLRS taken out in a single day, or at least evidenced in a day. 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems, both of those categories quite incredible. Now we have 415 drones on here, and I find this interesting because if you look at the last 2 nights of drones, we haven't had the numbers that are suggested here. So last night was 176. You had 100 and something the night before, and unless all of those were front-ended or back-ended on the back end of the night before and front-ended on the front end of last night, then it's difficult to work out the numbers there. I think they also take into account ones in a day. So I'm not 100% sure. In fact, I'm fairly sure these are only the nightly attacks, and they don't include what takes place in the day. So we know yesterday, for example, 5 drones slammed into Zaporizhia. Was that yesterday morning or the morning before? Anyway, you get the point, is that they are using these an awful lot during the daytimes as well, these one-way attack drones. And they're probably added to these statistics, but not the overnight blue infographic. Anyway, so I just thought I'd throw that one in. I don't normally talk about these figures because of the cutoff period from half the night to half the night, so it makes them not so useful. I go to the blue infographic as a good indication of the night, but this tells you, over a large period of time, you'll get a trend, a 24-hour trend for these numbers here. But yeah, 5 MLRS and 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems. That's incredible. 120 vehicles and fuel tanks. That is comfortably above 100 again there. And as it was yesterday. And 2 pieces of special equipment. So I think this indicates that the Russians are still very active on the front lines. 940 and 120 vehicles is pretty significant. And then artillery systems, the Ukraine is still working on them. And then to lose 5 MLRS and 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems is a real problem. I wonder where those are, those anti-aircraft warfare systems, whether they are in Crimea. We've got another video from Primary of a destruction of more equipment. We've got an aircraft that was lost this morning. I say this morning, 4 o'clock this morning, attacking Zaporizhia. So that was shot down. I've just done a breaking news video on that. And we've got the evidence of the 2 aircraft that were taken out at, was it Kacha Air Base, the other night as well. So the Russians are losing some serious kit at the moment. And it is expensive kit. It is a mixture of aircraft, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, as well as a lot of radar systems and a lot of air defense systems. So, good time for the Ukrainians. However, they did have a bit of a disaster yesterday, and I don't have any update as to the losses involved here. Today, enemy launched the Russians launched a combined strike on the territory of one of the training units of the ground forces of Ukraine. Among the means of destruction used were 2 Iskander ballistic missiles. Unfortunately, it's not possible to completely avoid losses among the personnel, was the claim. The relevant emergency services are working on the spot. Wounded are promptly provided with all necessary medical assistance in order to preserve the lives and health of people. Constant work is underway to equip training centres and other military facilities with reliable shelters. So yet again, another training facility here. Now, the problem is that, unless you put your training centres, what are the ranges of the Iskander? I wonder, Iskander range, because it's going to be 500 kilometers. So you can, it might depend what Iskander missile you're firing, but you can get your training done much further back, but then it's not close to the front lines, and you've got a completely inefficient kind of logistical setup where you're taking your troops off the front line for a little bit of training, or they're on rotation, and then you have to get them 1,000 kilometers away, type thing, and then back. That might be not particularly practical, but then if you don't do that, then they're at risk of these strikes. And so for the umpteenth time there's been a strike on a training ground. Russia strikes a Ukrainian training ground with Iskander missiles. Casualties are reported. Despite security precautions, which have improved by all accounts, a direct hit against a shelter made it impossible to fully prevent casualties. So it could be, and I'm speculating here, but it could be that actually they successfully did get their troops into the shelter, that this was, they followed the precautions, they had the shelters built up, and then a direct hit on the shelter caused casualties. Russia's published a video of another confirmed strike on a Ukrainian training ground. 2 Iskander ballistic missiles hit Novorossiysk yesterday, about 20 kilometers from the border with Belarus. So that's interesting. So maybe they were trying to get away with not having it close to Russia, but having training over here near Belarus, and that it still obviously was within range. It's the third strike here in 6 weeks. Ukraine admits some soldiers died. As Tim White said, that's not acceptable. Yeah, so you have those trade-offs, and unfortunately, sometimes you make the wrong evaluation in a trade-off. But if you're going to directly hit infrastructure where soldiers are sheltering, then obviously that's going to raise questions about the quality of the shelter and whether it's fit for purpose. But it could just be a particularly good strike that managed to have the desired outcome from the Russian point of view. But it looks like, a couple of buildings on fire there. So that talks of at least 2 strikes. This is not good news for the Ukrainians at all there. But hopefully not as wide-ranging in casualties as we have seen earlier in the war, but who knows at the moment. Now, Malcontent News says, I haven't seen this level of doom posting by Russian mill bloggers since November 2022. There is something in the big picture they're seeing. We still assess Russia isn't standing up new military units like it did in 2023 and 2024. Zapad 2025, so that was the military exercises between Belarus and Russia, revealed the lack of reserves. Is it a recruitment issue, a funding issue, an equipment issue, a demographic issue, a political issue? Is Russia growing war weary? Is it as simple as winter is coming and the Russian offensive will slow in the next 30 to 90 days depending on weather? And he's referring more pertinently to this. So Visioner reports that former leader of the Donbass Russian separatists and veteran of the so-called SVO, the war, the Special Military Operation, Pavel Gubarev, we've heard from him a number of times previously, responds to Dmitry Rogozin's statement regarding the deadlock situation. I reported on Rogozin, I think, yesterday, and what he said about there being a deadlock on the front lines, on the Russia-Ukraine front, due to the balance of forces. Gubarev writes, quote, I would add to Rogozin's words that on many sections of the front we are attacking while the enemy is defending. Because of this, we are suffering incomparably heavy losses. This is what I tell you about when the Ukrainians start losing a lot more or more equipment than the Russians. It is a reflection of the fact that they are attacking in a number of places. So while it's bad that they're losing equipment, it's good that they have the ability to at least attack in places and aren't just sitting in defense ad infinitum. But it does come with its issues attacking. You are going to take losses. And that's what they're saying here. Look, we're attacking a whole bunch of places on the front line, and we are suffering, though, not just losses as a result of doing that, but incomparably heavy losses. In fact, they're so heavy you can't compare them to anything else. So this is not a good evaluation, really, as far as the Russians are concerned. Quote, the armed forces of Ukraine are completely satisfied with the current situation and do not particularly need any peace. And that's a fascinating insight there. They're not rushing to peace at the moment, the Ukrainians, because they're feeling that time might work in their favor. Considering their effective work against our oil refineries with 26% of production destroyed, the situation created is strategically beneficial for them. At the same time, state propaganda continues to mislead the public as if the Ukrainian army is faltering and we will soon win. In reality, the current situation is already tantamount to defeat for us. Russia does not have the capability to complete the special military operation with the achievement of set goals and victory under the colonial system of the current government. Wow. So this is a kind of evil gherkin level of, pro-ultra-nationalist, pro-Russia, pro-war sentiment that is clashing with reality, and reality is winning. And this particular Gubarev is very forthright in detailing that. And one wonders, as he says, the Russian public are not being made aware of this because of all the propaganda. I've always been wondering throughout the course of this war how much Putin knows about what's going on along the front lines. How much is he being filled in? How decent is the intelligence that he's taking in briefings from the armed forces? Are they holding things back? Are they curating very carefully what they tell Putin? And if he doesn't have a full access to decent information, is he making bad decisions, garbage in, garbage out? That could also be an issue. And so they continue to throw people at the problem, take these incomparably heavy losses, and in the hope that they're going to somehow achieve what Putin still wants and still thinks he can. Because because he doesn't really have a good grasp of what's going on. So anyway, lots to take on board there. Now, Ukrainians appear to be using their guided glide bombs still fairly effectively. This is apparently a command post of the Russian forces and a concentration of Russian forces, including officers, according to no reports. This was a whole, those are two whole parts of this extended block of flats there. Just quite incredible that these guided glide bombs can cause such insane destruction, with these buildings just collapsing down, causing those two areas of gap in the larger building. And look at all of the debris that flies out afterwards. And yeah, that's the end of that. Pretty frightening destructive capabilities of those guide bombs, especially if they hit the right places. Now, Russia is apparently moving toward a year-round military conscription under a new bill. While conscripts are officially barred from being deployed abroad, but of course we can argue as to whether abroad doesn't include the four constitutionally stolen oblasts of Zaporizhia, Kherson, Luhansk and Donetsk. So if they've written them into the constitution as being part of Russia, then actually you can send your conscripts to defend, scare quotes, defend those parts of the map, in the same way that they are able to send conscripts to Kursk to defend, or were when the Ukrainians were in Kursk. So while conscripts are officially barred from being deployed abroad, reports indicate that many are pressured into signing contracts with Russia's defense ministry and are sent to fight in Ukraine. So when you do your military service, your annual military service, those are your conscripts, they're not allowed to be sent abroad. But what they do very often is press gang them into signing contracts. And then once they've signed that contract, then you're going to the front line. But, the idea that they're going to look at a year-round military conscription, because they do it, is it April, and they're two at times a year. Anyway, moving to a whole year-round conscription would just indicate that they are in desperate straits. Now, Primari seem to be like the dog's bollocks, these guys. They are just awesome. Routinely blowing up with decent one-way attack drones. I don't know the variety. I have seen one. I've seen the shape of one that was caught in another drone's video feed from behind, and it looked like one of these ones that we're talking about that weren't able to be jammed. But I don't know. They evidently have slightly more destructive power than, obviously, a lot more than FPV. These are decent drones, and they're being sent routinely into Crimea, and they are causing absolute havoc. So here we have another coastal radar system, or another coastal radar system, this one, an MR-10 M1, MES M1, okay, whatever. And then 2 Russian AN-26, these are transport planes. So let's check out yet another Primari awesome video of some more Crimean destruction. You've got to be worried if you're operating anything in Crimea these days that is vaguely valuable. Here's the radar getting taken out. Bosh. I assume that's the end of that bad boy. I'm wondering if that's 2 there. But anyway, here's a plane, fairly sizable plane, these, and you can see it exploding in the background there. And this is one drone seeing the effect of another drone. It burns well. I think the official... there was an official line from the Primari group says something about burning well, and you can see why. But yeah, that is another really successful night, and you can expect to see those 2 planes on tomorrow's loss list for the Russians. Yeah, I don't know this. Oh, I've included this because you get a sense of the size of the plane. So that is the plane there. There it is. There's the transport plane for illustrative purposes. That's an AN-26. Obviously going to hurt the Russians. They'll be using that for transporting equipment and whatnot. And that appears, or they appear to have been taken out. That is their... in fact, they know the exact one that has been taken out, one of them. 30 Blue RF 46878, good old open source intelligence. Anyway, that's been geolocated. So really good news for the Ukrainians there. Now, on top of that, we've got another video here. This is coming from the Unmanned Systems Forces, the Flying Skull Battalion. This is... for me, the reason I've included this one today, because I could include all sorts, it's got to have kind of particular meaning. But it's the idea that HIMARS are being used still and being used to take out artillery in a kind of typical counter-battery mode. And of course, the HIMARS are supposed to be just a replacement for general artillery, like howitzers and whatnot. This is like the modern evolution of artillery, but some people see it as kind of different, separate. But I think the idea was that we don't need towed howitzers and whatnot anymore because we can use HIMARS. But of course, it's more expensive in terms of the ammunition. But then again, you've also got advantages conveyed by using towed howitzers. They can hide, and the ammunition is cheaper and so on and so forth. So this war has shown that actually howitzers still have their place. But then, of course, you have the challenge of drones thrown in there too. But anyway, HIMARS here being used to take out artillery placements, as you can see on that video, and I believe trucks as well, the loading trucks too. So good news there. And then we have satellite image of a Pantsir, apparently air defense system that was destroyed in Luhansk by a Ram 2X strike. These are the equivalent of Lancet drones that seem to be having quite a bit of a success at the moment for the Ukrainians. It was claimed previously by Dodzia Shipiona that a Russian Pantsir was destroyed in Luhansk airport somewhere around the 11th to the 13th of September. So this happened a good fortnight ago. But now we didn't necessarily have the evidence of that. Now we have the evidence. So that is good to see, because that is an important piece of kit. Now, I mentioned the Su-34. So this is probably the biggest bit of news from this morning. As I did my breaking news on this, that should give you some indication. So this is a Su-34, which is a twin-seater fighter bomber that has gone down, and you've had, this is one near Zaporizhia that has been dropping, one presumes it was dropping on the way to drop guided glide bombs, or having just dropped them, to give hell to the Zaporizhian civilians. As we've seen over the last week, Zaporizhia has been absolutely hammered by guided glide bombs. They've been a scourge of the front line for some time, and they've been a real burden on the civilians of Zaporizhia, who, honestly, this last week it's been horrific there. They've also had Shahid drones just slamming into the city, doing these like really steep terminal dives in the middle of the day. So there definitely needs to be air defense around there. And I was saying just the other day, Ukraine needs to really get some Patriot systems to Zaporizhia. It turns out someone was listening to me And they've done that, and they've shot down a Su-34, and this has been admitted by fighter bomber. So it appears to definitely to have happened, although there's no visual evidence of it. Now, it's worth noting that these guided glide bombs that the Russians are using, there is an extended range variant. In fact, it had already been extended to 90 kilometers from the sort of 50 kilometers previously. Now it's sort of 60 to 90 kilometers. Now there's talk that it's gone up to 100 to 110 kilometers if it's dropped from 12,500 meters. Now, the Patriot has a range of 160 kilometers, so I'm assuming it's going to be Patriot or something similar, maybe SAMP-T. Medium range probably is not going to cut the mustard, but it depends what the Zaporizhian Su-34 bombers were using. But if they're dropping it, you know, if you're talking about I guess 90 kilometers, so this is 90 kilometers. If it's 110 kilometers, 20 kilometers back, you can easily get, you know, you can place a Patriot, you know, somewhere between Zaporizhia and Dnipro, and you're easily going to be able to shoot down a Su-34, in principle. The challenge is, what do you do with your system after that? Because the Russians are going to be hunting it. So my speculation is that they would have shot that one down, got out of dodge. The Russians are going to probably be a little bit scared to operate their Su-34s, wait for it to calm down, then they'll start using them again, and then the Ukrainians will have to wonder whether they are going to risk placing, because it's a high-risk thing to put a Patriot system or something similar this close to the front line, even if it is, you know, 100-odd kilometers back from the front line, or, you know, 60, 70 kilometers back. Anyway, that has happened. That's a really sore loss for the Russians, no doubt. That's a decent jet. That's a modern jet taken out with two pilots on board, two crew members. I assume that they have gone the same way as a plane. So that happened as well. Right. So in other words, really pretty useful week for the Ukrainians in terms of attriting some really significant equipment, especially when you've got 4 air defense systems added to today's list and 5 multiple launch rocket systems, and then you've got radars and stuff, which are probably they'll be in these special equipment pieces list. I presume they're in that category rather than anti-aircraft warfare systems. I don't know if they put the radars associated with anti-aircraft batteries in that category. So say, for example, you've got a S400 or S300 battery, you're going to have different components to that air defense system. You're going to have the launchers, a transporter erector launcher, then you're going to have the radar bits, and then you might have a transloader. Do all of those bits go under anti-aircraft, or is that just the launchers? Do the radars for that go under special equipment, or special equipment things like the radar we just seen, that mast in Crimea, that coastal radar, so on and so forth? So, you know, some clarity there would be useful. Now, on to distance strikes, and we have 176 drones sent into Ukraine, so it's a pretty decent number, and 150 of them were shot down or suppressed. 13 drones hit, it says here, 8 locations with debris falling in 1 more. The attack is still ongoing, so it could be that some of those are still in the air. So that's why there's the maths doesn't quite work out there. 176 minus 13 would be 163, but it says 150 being shot down. So it could be that at the time of the 176 being flown in, there were 13 still flying. So if it's only 13 getting through from 176, that's a really decent interception rate for the Ukrainians. But of course, even 13 drones getting through is doing 13 amounts of damage to quite possibly something important. Now, this is just a video that's worth looking at of a drone that has been affected by electronic warfare. So that looks like some kind of Shahed equivalent. Oh no, is that? I'm trying to work out. FP1 type drone. Impact of electronic warfare and FP1. So that's, oh no, this is a Ukrainian drone. That's an FP, yeah, because that's got the upside down V shape tail there. Yeah, so there it is. So that's an FP1 drone. That's a Ukrainian drone. And this is what happens when it's affected by electronic warfare. And it as you can see here, it just falls out of the sky, or just glides calmly to the ground and lands in a field. And of course, something like that, it gives you an indication of the explosive capacity of that drone. But it also can show you that these drones, when they are intercepted, it's lucky for the Russians there that fell in a field. If that falls in an industrial area, commercial area, residential area, then that causes an awful lot of problem. And when you've got 176 of similar sorts of drones to that flying into Ukraine, not all of them have warheads on, but ones you do intercept and bring down, they can do that to a building, and that's really going to hurt. Right, I have no information about anything hit in Ukraine. Obviously, only 13 drones supposedly got through, so maybe there's not many drones means limited information. Maybe they're hit sensitive targets and we're not hearing about them because of that. Anyway, I had no information of strikes inside Ukraine, quite a bit about what's happened in Russia. So Astra reported last night on explosions in Belorechensk, Krasnodar region. Residents confirmed strikes there. Local sources saying a chemical industrial facility was hit, and apparently that is to do with the military industrial complex, so that would be providing chemicals for explosives. Damage assessment is still underway. That's good, and we actually hear that major Russian chemical plant reportedly halts operations after Ukrainian drone attack last night. Eurochem Belorechensk specializes in nitrogen and complex fertilizers, but also produces phosphorus-based products and sulfuric acid, a key component in ammunition manufacturing. So that's an important site in the military industrial complex, one would assume, and that appears to have been taken out. There is some nighttime imagery of explosions in the background, but we don't really have any BDA, battle damage assessment. Luhansk was also struck. Russian warehouses with ammunition were apparently hit there. Nighttime video again with fires in the background from a couple of different angles, but don't really know too much more. There's some information still coming out, was coming out yesterday from Salavat, which was struck previously. And in fact, I think this one, that's it, just generally burning. And you can see that actually it was in a lot of trouble. This one actually appears to show an explosion of another drone. Apparently, it says it's another drone. It could just be one of the parts of the processing plant just exploding, but apparently it's a drone. I don't know if someone spotted a drone there going in the moment of a Ukrainian long-range drone hitting Salavat there. But anyway, that was in trouble, and I presume is still, in a spot of bother. Then, of course, we had what happened yesterday that I did 2 breaking news updates on. So the first breaking news update was on Novorossiysk. So just to remind you of where that is, luckily we've got Andrew Perpetua's map open. So Novorossiysk is on the Russian coastline of the Black Sea, and this is a home to the Black Sea Fleet. That is here. So I had a breaking news update on that, and then we heard that Tuapse was also being targeted. Now, there didn't appear to be any success for the naval drones, for the USVs striking here, but there was success in Tuapse. However, there appears to have been aerial drone UAVs striking Novorossiysk at the same time, and they did apparently have some success there. So anyway, first of all, we were seeing sort of drones get taken out in the Black Sea outside of the port, indicating that, the Russians had been somewhat successful in taking out there. We see in the background there on the horizon, somewhat successful in taking out Ukrainian USVs, but actually some did get into, and this is really significant, so they did get into Novorossiysk harbour. Now this is your naval harbour, and if you can get in, even though this seems to have got blown up, this drone here, and it doesn't seem like there was any success in the USV striking targets inside Novorossiysk. The fact that at least one of them did get in, possibly a couple actually did get in there, is definitely a concern for the Russians, and would lead the Ukrainians to be pretty upbeat about doing further attacks with maybe more drones, more chance of success, so on and so forth. So you had these air defense guns that were, I think, trained at the water and trying to take these blow them up. But we have heard from RBC Ukraine that the GUR operation, the military intelligence operation, paralysed the work of the Transneft oil loading complex and the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal located near Novorossiysk. So that's near Novorossiysk. GUR naval drones also blew up an oil loading pier in the port of Tuapse, and that's where we're going to come to next. So there was success for aerial drones, and the picture there appears to show some kind of hydrocarbons facility on fire. It's good news there for the Ukrainians. This was a building of the CPC, I think, which is a petroleum consortium building. Fires on the ground outside, some broken windows and whatnot, but it just goes to show that it wasn't just USVs inside Novorossiysk, but you had UAVs operating there quite a lot. This is Tuapse then, and I showed you this yesterday, got through into the port and then dog-legged around here, the naval drone. It was getting attacked. The fact that it kind of, you can see it just there, it did this turn and came back around, makes me wonder, and I was speculating this yesterday, makes me wonder whether once it was in a port, it didn't really know what it was going for. Maybe they've got satellite imagery of the port, but they don't know, it's maybe not like live satellite imagery, so it might be from like 2 days ago. They're not 100% sure what's definitely going to be in the port, and there's this element, for me at least, this idea that it got in the port and then was like, oh no, we want to go this way. It went all the way over here. Like, if it really wanted to go for this jetty, it should have like gone around the corner straight away and gone straight for it, because the longer that is flying around the port, right, the higher the chance of it getting blown up, as we've seen with many of these other drones, right? So that fairly large kind of speedboat size, and when you got a big anti-aircraft gun throwing lead into there, then it's, you know, they're not too difficult to take out. Anyway, this one then dog-legged, came back and then just rammed into the port. And you're thinking, first of all, was that the highest value thing it could hit there? Or was it a case of just like, oh, right, let's go for that quick. We're going to get hit by something, so let's just blow something up and show that we can do damage here. I don't know. The other thing worth recognizing, because you might think, well, why the hell hasn't it gone and hit this ship in there, or a moored ship there? But of course, these are going to be commercial vessels that aren't owned by the Russian state per se. And if they start hitting things like that, then that gives Russia permission to hit vessels loading in Odessa, although they have done that, but more explicitly do that. Ukraine need to be very careful about what they hit and make sure that it is port infrastructure, kind of state-controlled stuff, rather than commercial vessels using the ports and incur the wrath of outside entities. So it's worth maybe thinking about, and you can see that from another angle there. So didn't hit this jetty, which had a ship on it, didn't hit the ship over there, didn't go all the way over to the other side. In fact, started going that way and then dog-legged and came all the way back here, and you know, that makes you wonder why. Right, so that was where it hit, geolocated. That's in Tuapse. The larger point here, and you can see images, video images of some of them getting hit and not getting to their end destination. That was in Tuapse as well. So another drone not making it to the target. But the idea here is that the Ukrainians have successfully got to Novorossiysk and inside the ports, both ports of Novorossiysk and Tuapse, and in one case done damage with the USV. Surely they'll be thinking, right, we've got a load of these, we're talking about selling them because we've got too many of them, selling them abroad. Well, you know, how many can we send? I asked yesterday, how many of these can they send at once? You know, is there a maximum they can send due to like bandwidth or simple operators, trained up operators, or the number of drones they have? Like, what's the maximum they can send? Because I'd be thinking, right, every single one of those, let's send them all at Tuapse tomorrow, type thing. Right, then let's listen to Zelenskyy. So Zelenskyy has spoken in an interview with Axios, which has been very revealing. It's sort of coming out this morning in dribs and drabs. I mean, you can obviously watch the whole thing. But anyway, Zelenskyy has said, if the Russians attack our energy, Trump supports that we can answer on energy. Trump said the same about drone factories or missile sites, which is obvious, right? But actually, you know, it's good to hear it from Trump, I guess, that, yeah, you can hit drone factories. You can hit Russian energy infrastructure because they've been hitting yours. Don't have a problem with that. So Zelenskyy is saying, look, Trump said he doesn't have a problem with that. Let's go for it. Trump promised to consider providing Ukraine with weapons that would make Putin sit at the negotiating table. Wow. Right. So this wasn't in an interview with Trump, by the way. That's an illustrative picture. This was from an Axios interview, which looks more like this, right? But the idea is that he has been Zelenskyy has put it to Trump that he needs something like, I'd imagine, Tomahawks, and Trump is going to consider them. Trump's position appears to have changed on a 6 months. As I said the other day, could there be a real change in what is provided by the US? Even if it has to be bought by Ukraine or allied nations. Zelensky's told Axios he made a secret weapons request to Trump that could pressure Putin to talks, with Trump replying, "We will work on it." He also said he's ready to step down after the war and will call for elections if a ceasefire is reached. That, my opinion is, he probably doesn't want to run after the war is over. Like, he must be exhausted. If I was him, whatever, I have no idea how he feels, other than just, I have to assume that he's absolutely exhausted. I can't think that he would want to run after the election. He would want, he would just want to say, right, anyone else can run, go for it, Zelenskyy, whatever, take over reconstruction. I've got you through the war. I'm going to go off and write some more television shows, or maybe just bloody retire and see my children, etc., etc. If we have long-distance weapons from the US, we will use them, he said. And the question from Axios, that's Jonathan, what's his name? What would you tell somebody who works at the Kremlin today? First of all, they have to know where the bomb shelters are. If they will not stop the war, they will need it in any case. That's a really big threat there. Like, Putin needs to know where his bomb shelter is. We're looking at you, Moscow. That's what that tells me. I think that's a really ballsy threat there. Axios journalist asked what those working in the Kremlin should know after an attack on Kiev's government building. Zelenskyy answered plainly, first, know where your bomb shelters are. If you do not stop the war, you will need them. Wow. Okay, so that was kind of bridging the distance strikes, because that's talking about distance strikes, onto other bits and pieces. We'll start with Steve Rosenberg, the BBC journalist in Moscow, saying today one Russian paper calls Donald Trump's criticism of Moscow, so that volte-face, that about-face he did, quote, barking and verbal poison, but predicts, quote, new attempts by Trump to make a deal with Russia. I don't think so. I don't think, actually, that's going to happen. I think the indication, if he sticks by those words, is that, no, we're beyond doing a deal now. Just get on and do some war. Another declares the US, quote, and this I find fascinating, not surprising, but very interesting. It should make people like J.D. Vance and those who aren't particularly aligned with Ukraine and are aligned somewhat with Russia, or people who are denying that many in the administration think that. This should tell you everything you need to know. Another declares the US, quote, is Russia's natural ally against Europe. How many times have I told you that the US, under Trump, the Heritage Foundation itself has actually, they've had a conference on breaking up the EU and Euroscepticism, right? So the kind of American isolationist, transactionalist, Trumpian Heritage Foundation lot don't like the EU because they see it as a competitor. And Putin doesn't like the EU because it stands up to Russia in a way that, as you can see with the US, no one else does. So both Putin and Trump would like to see the EU fall apart, for actually fairly similar reasons, with some caveats and differences here and there. So the EU needs to really stand strong. But here is an example that the Russians get this. Russia's natural ally against Europe is Trump. Fascinating. They're saying the quiet bits out loud. Now, Russia's finance ministry has proposed, as we talked about the other day, raising VAT from 20% to 22% in 2026 to fund the war to cover a growing deficit. The hike would bring in around $14.3 billion, while defense spending remains at record levels. Trump called Russia a paper tiger in big economic trouble. So Russian finance ministry does propose raising VAT. So that looks like it's going to happen. And if it does, that's an indication they're in trouble. Around 360 gas stations, petrol stations in Russia have shut down due to fuel shortages, according to Russian media. The crisis is most severe in the south, with a 14% drop in stations, while in occupied Crimea and Sevastopol, nearly half have closed. Wow, real problem there in the petrol station market. Now, Sergei Aksyonov, head of occupied Crimea, has officially admitted fuel shortages on the peninsula, blaming reduced refinery output in Russia. He promised AI-95 would return to stations within 2 days and AI-92 within 2 weeks. urging residents and visitors to be patient. So, admission they've got a problem. Now, we hear that Ukrainian intelligence has claimed it's hacked Russia's national payment system. They say cyber specialists carried out a large-scale attack on the digital infrastructure of the SPB payment system and its provider Transtelecom. Russians had problems making any online payments or transfers. Again, that's really going to hurt the Russians there. So then we have problems in Denmark last night. There were more issues with drones. There were rumours that the drones the night before that shut down Copenhagen airport might have been training aircraft that weren't known about. That is one theory that's been proposed, or maybe there's evidence of that. Unidentified drones, though, were much more widespread in Denmark last night. And this could be like we had that. You remember at the beginning of the Trump administration, there was all of that panic over drones being sighted around, I forget where it was, anyway, around, was it LAX or wherever, in the US. And it turns out that actually, as everyone panics, they're looking for them more. And it was a mix of a whole bunch of things, like some drones plus drones are already there, but now everyone's aware of them, and then blah, blah, blah. And it was much ado about nothing, right? Essentially. And that could be the case with Denmark, as everyone panics and then starts looking and there's all these drones. But unidentified drones over Denmark have been spotted last night flying in the area where military facilities are located, Air Force bases, Special Operations Forces bases, and where Danish F-16s are maintained, according to TV2. So there could well be a bit of a larger issue going on there. Aalborg Airport in Denmark was closed because drones were spotted in its airspace. The airport is used for both commercial and military flights. It's reported that drones left after about 3 hours and that they followed a similar pattern to the drones over Copenhagen Airport several days earlier. Drone sightings also reported by other Danish airports. And the Danes last night claimed that they were operated by professional actors. Some people joking about like that meaning actual actors, but no, like people that know what they're doing with drones. So the Danish are saying professional actors were being used for those, were operating those drones, and that, while they're not ruling out Russia, it's not ruled in either. It could be anything, but they know what they're doing with their drones. Now, according to Spiegel, Russian reconnaissance aircraft flew over the German frigate Hamburg twice, which is currently participating in NATO exercises in the exercise Neptune Strike in the Baltic Sea. So Russian aircraft flew at a low altitude on Friday and Saturday, less than 100 meters. That's incredibly threatening to a naval frigate. So something needs to be done about this. And it turns out that lots of people are talking about it. So Emmanuel Macron yesterday said, he said that NATO should respond, quote, more decisively to Russian provocations, but oppose shooting down air targets. Actually, is a bit more nuanced. He said that Russia, by violating the airspace of NATO countries with drones and aircraft, is trying to reduce their support for Ukraine, hinting at their own security priorities. Regarding NATO's response to these incidents, Macron said that, in his opinion, it was proportionate to the threats. He added that Russia was testing the alliance, but in his opinion, it was not worth opening fire on aircraft and drones. That was on the previous thing. So it's not, he is slightly nuanced here. He's saying, like, yeah, we did the right things. We didn't shoot them down. But I think now, like, it's about giving warnings. And if the warnings are there, now we're going to shoot them down. So new provocations would mean that Russia has chosen escalation. So, quote, we will have to react a little more decisively, which is saying, but now it's okay to shoot them down because we've made the warnings. As said the French president, he refused to specify what he meant, noting that, quote, the ability to be convincing in these matters lies precisely in not being too predictable. In other words, strategic ambiguity. I'm not going to say exactly what, but yeah, there you go. So an ever-increasing number of top Western officials are signalling support for shooting down a Russian aircraft violating NATO airspace, following a string of recent incursions, including the activity yesterday over the German frigate along the alliance's eastern flank. So this is Kiev Independent talking about a number of different people, including Ursula von der Leyen. We're going to hear from her in a second. Trump himself. You've got the Estonians talking about it. You've got the Polish talking about it. Petr Pavel, the Czech president, also justifying shooting down of aircraft. Despite growing calls for tougher sanctions, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio told CBS News that NATO policy remains focused on interception rather than direct engagement. So he was one of the few that's been kind of against it, although I don't know that he said that before Trump said his stuff on it. Anyway, there is this growing move. We have Poland is now moving to change its laws to allow the military to shoot down Russian drones over Ukraine without waiting for NATO or EU approval. So this is a unilateral ability to shoot down, to decide to shoot down threats above Polish airspace. A change in law so that they can do that if they need to do it. The government wants to restore rapid response powers taken away in 2022, adopting a shoot first, ask later principle to deal with cross-border threats. And then Ursula von der Leyen has said, I've a personal opinion. My opinion is we have to defend every square centimetre of the territory. That means if there's an intrusion in the airspace, EU airspace, after warning, after being clear, of course, the option of shooting down a fighter jet that is intruding our airspace is on the table. So you are now starting to get much stronger responses from really important people across the spectrum there. And I think that is good news for Ukraine. I think it's good news for European security. It's good news for NATO security. Now, you might see it's escalatory, but hey, who's doing the escalation here? Because if the Russians know that these warnings are out there and they continue to do it, that's on them. Yeah, and we need to remember that. Okay, that's enough for me. Hopefully that was useful and interesting. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. Please remember that there is the Car for Ukraine Autumn Harvest, the ATP Geopolitics landing page for that can be found at atpgeo.com/donate. We are above 1 truck at the moment. Thank you so much for that. You can get your patches and pins. Big shout out to the people, the anonymous people, but also Julian Roster. Thank you so much, mate. Some very generous people here. Cheryl Waitley, of course, Thomas Carlson, Michael Lanning, and all these others whom I have also thanked previously. So thank you. Please help out with that campaign. It'll be super appreciated. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.